Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going on a massive macro to micro geographic journey. We're going to start our lens way out in space, looking down at the sheer immensity of North America. And then, we're going to slowly zoom all the way into the freezing, snowy taiga forests of Canada to see exactly how human beings interact with this totally extreme landscape. Let's get into it. Here's our flight plan for today. First, discovering North America. Second, mapping the continent. Third, major physical features. Fourth, the river systems. And finally, number 5, the Canadian lumberjacks.
Part 1. Discovering North America, the myth of Columbus. So we were all taught the classic story, right? Christopher Columbus, an Italian explorer, setting sail westward across the Atlantic in 1492. He was funded by the Spanish monarchs, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. But here's the thing, he wasn't actually looking for a new continent. He was just looking for a new route to India, China, Japan, and the Spice Islands so he could bring back silks and spices.
But let's go ahead and correct the historical record here. Columbus didn't actually discover it first. Adventurous European seamen, specifically the Norsemen and the Vikings, had already visited the continent as early as 986 CE. That is roughly 500 years earlier. Wild, right? And on top of that, the continent isn't even named after Columbus. It was actually named after another Italian explorer, Amerigo Vespucci, who reached the continent later in the year 1507. Okay, Part 2. Mapping the continent, North America at a glance.
North America lies entirely in the northern and western hemispheres, and it looks, well, kind of triangular in shape. You'll probably notice right away that just two countries, Canada and the United States, occupy more than 3/4 of this vast area. It's completely bounded by oceans, too. You've got the Arctic Ocean up north, the Atlantic to the east, and the Pacific to the west. And then down south, it's joined to South America by the very narrow Isthmus of Panama.
It's absolutely crucial to grasp the massive extremes of the third largest continent in the world. Just look at these numbers. The latitudinal extent stretches all the way from 7 degrees north to 84 degrees north. We are talking about a total area of approximately 24 million square kilometers, and it hosts both extreme heights like Mount Denali at a towering 6,194 meters above sea level, and extreme lows like Death Valley, which literally drops to 86 meters below sea level.
Moving on to Part 3. Major physical features. 4 distinct regions.
Geographers basically break North America down into 4 major physical divisions. We've got the Western Cordilleras out in the west, the Eastern Highlands over in the east, the Canadian Shield up in the north, and the Central Lowlands right smack in the middle. Let's break these down. There is a massive geological showdown happening on this continent. On one side, you have the Western Cordilleras. These are young, lofty fold mountains formed about 50 million years ago from tectonic plate movements. They're packed with active volcanoes and really high, steep peaks. But on the other side, you have the Eastern Highlands, also known as the Appalachian Mountains. Now these are ancient. Formed 480 million years ago, they were actually once higher than the Rockies. But over millions of years, they've been heavily eroded down into lower, much more rounded mountains.
Now you might be wondering about that word, cordillera. It's actually a Spanish word meaning a rope or chain. Spanish explorers gave the Western Mountains this name because the parallel ranges, ranges like the Cascades, the Sierra Nevada, and the Rockies, they look exactly like twisted cords stretching side by side all the way down the toast.
Over on the eastern side, we have another fascinating geographical feature called the fall line. So the eastern slopes of the Appalachians are quite steep, and rivers rising there flow across the plateau before suddenly dropping to the coastal plains. This zone marks exactly where a series of parallel rivers descend by means of waterfalls. And hey, this isn't just pretty scenery. These waterfalls along the fall line are incredibly useful for generating hydroelectric power. Rounding out our 4 divisions, we have the Canadian or Laurentian Shield and the Central Lowlands. The Canadian Shield forms the geologic core of the continent up in the north. It's made of ancient hard rocks that were literally scraped and scoured out by moving ice during the last ice age. Then, nestled right between the mountains in the east and the west, we find the Central Lowlands. This is a vast, flat region that slopes north towards the Arctic and south towards the Gulf of Mexico, basically acting as the continent's agricultural heartland.
Part 4. The river systems, veins of the continent.
Notice how the major rivers naturally flow outwards in all 4 directions from the continent's interior? You have rivers like the Mackenzie draining northwards into the Arctic Ocean, the St. Lawrence and Hudson flowing east into the Atlantic, the Yukon and Columbia pushing west into the Pacific, and the mighty Mississippi-Missouri River system draining southward straight into the Gulf of Mexico.
These rivers are true lifelines. They provide water, fertile soil for agriculture, and massive amounts of hydroelectric power.
Which leads us to a critical thinking question. Why is the St. Lawrence River a very important inland waterway? Think about it. If you look at it on a map, it looks relatively short compared to something like the Mississippi, right? So why does it matter so much to the continent's overall infrastructure?
Well, here's why. The St. Lawrence River directly connects the 5 massive Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. It is arguably the most important inland commercial waterway in the entire world. Why? Because it provides a direct route for huge ocean-going vessels to travel deep into the heart of the North American continent. It perfectly links raw geography to actual human economic impact.
Finally, Part 5. The Canadian lumberjacks, life in the taiga forests.
It's a striking contrast, isn't it? Operating a heavy chainsaw deep in the winter snow just to produce massive piles of cut logs ready for transport. The coniferous, or taiga forests of Canada stretch in a continuous, incredibly vast belt from the Pacific coast all the way to the Atlantic. In these super remote regions, lumberjacks harvest softwood trees like spruce, pine, and cedar. It is freezing, heavy, hands-on labor in a totally extreme and isolated environment.
And get this, the actual logging is traditionally spread over just a brutal 100-day window in the winter. Why winter? Because the frozen sap makes the trees way easier to cut, and the logs can be dragged effortlessly over the frozen ground. It's a highly specialized, team-based pipeline. First, high riggers climb the trees to cut off branches. Then, saws or buckers cut the massive trunks into smaller lengths. Next, skidders collect, drag, and stack the logs along a frozen riverbank or railway line. And finally, haulers ensure the logs transfer down the river to the sawmills when the ice finally thaws in the summer.
So why does this intense labor in the Canadian Shield matter to you and me? Well, these logs become the pulp and paper used for global newsprint. In fact, Canada is the largest producer of newsprint in the world. The wood is also used for synthetic fibers like rayon, and sawn wood is absolutely essential for global construction and furniture making. Because of Canada's relatively small population and massive forests, lumbering is an enormous export earner, shipping surpluses to countries worldwide that are short on timber.
I want to end our explainer today with this powerful thought. Every job has dignity and deserves our respect. As we've journeyed from the macro scale of North America's immense geographic divisions down to its rivers and finally all the way to these remote lumber camps, it's a really profound reminder. Our everyday lives, the paper we read, the houses we live in, are built on the unseen, specialized, and often incredibly difficult labor of workers navigating North America's extreme geography. Thank you so much for joining me on this macro to micro journey. I'll leave you with this question. How many unseen hands built the environment you're sitting in right now? See you next time on The Explainer.